So odds are that if you're familiar with The Mask as a franchise, you simply know it because of Jim Carrey's 1994 movie. And if you're a super fan, then you might know that that movie had a sequel that came out in 2005 called Son of the Mask, and that movie is seen as one of the worst sequels of all time. But one thing most people don't realize is that The Mask is actually based off of a series of comics published by Dark Horse initially in the 1990s. For a little bit of background, basically in the 80s, comics started to get darker. Most notably, you had The Dark Knight Returns and stuff like Watchmen, V for Vendetta, you had Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run. Books like The Sandman and Hellblazer started coming out then. And all in all, looking back, you can see that there's a very clear shift away from characters like Superman or Spider-Man or Captain America, heroes who are happy and joyful and good. And instead, there's kind of a shift towards more edgy, boundary-pushing characters. And so as a result, in the 90s, you had all of these new superheroes coming out who were edgier and darker than the heroes of yesterday. I think perhaps the most notable superhero to come out during this time is probably Spawn. Basically, Spawn was created by Todd McFarlane, who had previously been a Spider-Man artist. And Spawn is exactly what I'm describing. He's darker and he's edgier and he kills people and he fights demons and he fights devils and there's blood in his comics. And so whenever Todd McFarlane, along with a bunch of other artists at that time, founded Image Comics, basically they were given free reign and able to do whatever it was they wanted. So in addition to Spawn, you had characters like Savage Dragon or The Darkness. And then over at Dark Horse, you had Frank Miller doing stuff like Sin City. You had Mike Mignola doing Hellboy. And also at Dark Horse, you had The Mask. Now, the Jim Carrey movie is very much in line with his other work. It's a comedy, like Dumb and Dumber or Ace Ventura, but The Mask is probably more in line with the kind of stuff I'm discussing. It's more in line with Spawn or The Darkness or The Max, which is a super underrated series, by the way. The Max, my beloved. But The Mask, not to be confused with The Max, is very different than the movie. The initial premise of both the movie and the comic are the same, but the way they approach it is completely different. Essentially, if you're unfamiliar with The Mask, then the mask is an object. It's a literal mask, but whenever you put it on, it gives you essentially Bugs Bunny powers. It makes you invulnerable and it gives you superpowers. It gives you super strength and it really kind of works based off of cartoon logic. Essentially, if you're wearing the mask and someone gets into a gunfight, then you're able to just pull out a giant, absurd rocket launcher or something to that extent, a giant, huge gun. If you get shot while wearing the mask, then you may take damage, but all in all, it doesn't affect you. And if you are hurt and then you put on the mask, then you're healed. And along with all these superpowers, the mask also gives you slight insanity, honestly. Maybe stronger than slight, but it certainly makes you more insane. It makes you tell jokes and say stupid things and do silly things. And this occurred to me before I started filming, that the mask essentially acts like any sort of power object that you find in other comic books. It's kind of like the Green Lantern ring in the sense that with the object you have power, but then without the object you don't have any power. And just as the case with the Captain America serum, for instance, the mask only accentuates the characteristics you already have. So basically, if you're a bad person and you put on the mask, you will continue doing bad things, but if you're a good person and you put on the mask, you will do good things. Now, The Mask is a series that whenever it first debuted, it had a trilogy of sorts. And so its first 3 series are the books that people really love. And then after that, it looks like there's like a series of false starts, essentially. They just kept on trying to do limited series with different characters and it just never really took off. It never really worked. But the thing that stands out to me is that even though people really like the initial 3 Mask series, I feel like The Mask as a concept never really is fully realized. I feel like this series has so much potential, but I feel like due to a series of kind of silly things and a series of missteps, you never actually see it all. I feel like The Mask as a franchise has never been all that it could be. And so this video is not me trashing on The Mask, but rather it's me saying that I wish that it were greater than it is. Because I think there are a lot of cool ideas here, I think there are a lot of cool concepts, but I think there are just a handful of things that need to be tweaked. And then I think one day we will have the perfect sequel to The Mask comic books. So The Mask movie stars Jim Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss. Essentially, he's just some guy and he gets the mask and he fights gangsters, blah, blah, blah. The comic starts off similarly, basically where you have the character Stanley Ipkiss and he buys the mask as a gift for his girlfriend. Stanley Ipkiss is basically a loser. He's basically a nobody. He kind of reminds me a lot of the main character from Enigma. Basically, he just has nothing going for him in life. And so whenever he puts on the mask, which imbues him with great power, he uses it to get back at the people who've wronged him. And so that's how the series kicks off, basically. Stanley puts on the mask and he kills like an old grade teacher who made fun of him, and he kills some guys who did bad work on his car and damaged his car. Whenever he's not wearing the mask, he becomes abusive towards his girlfriend, who he initially bought the mask for. And while he's wearing the mask, Stanley leads the police on a wild goose chase and wrecks the city. The police at this point in time are kind of led by Lieutenant Kellaway, who acts as a sort of Commissioner Gordon type character. Basically, it's one of those things where Kellaway is just like, we have to get the mask, we have to stop the mask, and then Stanley will go and do something stupid, and then Lieutenant Kellaway, at one point he gets his arm broken by the mask. And all in all, this section where Stanley Ipkiss has the mask is actually very brief. I think it's only like an issue or two. And the reason why is because his girlfriend Kathy figures out that Stanley is the mask. She figures out that he's going around and he's the one causing all the damages to the town, and she puts on the mask and then she shoots him. And so from there, Kathy, Stanley's girlfriend, turns in the mask to the police, and Lieutenant Kellaway puts it on, and then he becomes the mask. And so unlike Stanley, he doesn't go around hurting the people who have wronged him, but he's a cop, and so he goes around trying to clean up the town and fighting gangsters and so on. But as I said, the mask gives you a bit of insanity, it causes you to go a little bit crazy, and so at one point while Lieutenant Kellaway is wearing the mask, he comes up against his partner, and basically he just beats the crap out of his partner and almost kills him. And so from there, Lieutenant Kellaway realizes that the mask is too great of a power, it cannot be trusted, and so then Lieutenant Kellaway goes home and he buries the mask in his basement and covers it with concrete. And so that's how the first series ends, and from there basically you have gangsters who are still looking for the mask because they know about its unlimited crazy power. And so you have all these guys who want the mask, and then Lieutenant Kellaway tries to go and dig it up to protect himself whenever they start coming into his house trying to kill him. They shoot him and then they take the mask. But Lieutenant Kellaway survives, and basically he is the main character of the series if there is one. From this point onwards, he essentially just plays a role where he's like, I need to get the mask. Anytime he sees the mask pop up, he is after it. And so in the original trilogy, a few different things happen. Gangsters hire a guy named Walter, who is absurdly strong. He reminds me a lot of the Russian from the Punisher story, Welcome Back, Frank. What I mean by that is just that he's a character who is just way too strong for no apparent reason. He's just a human, but at the same time, he can survive anything. He can survive being burned, and he can survive being, shot into a lake, and he harms himself for fun, and he hurts other people for fun, and he doesn't really have a character other than he's just super strong. And so at one point, Kathy gets the mask back again, and she wears it, and she fights Walter. I think prior to that, there were a bunch of teenagers who had the mask and were using it to go and do stupid things. I believe it's in the final book of the original trilogy. You have all these neo-Nazis who want the mask, and you have ninjas who are after the mask, and it's just really over the top and zany. And so if we're being completely honest, each of the mask books is basically just about someone trying to get the mask, and it has a kind of familiar pattern. Each book kind of feels like one of those things where it's like, okay, I've read this before, but each book also has a different mask wearer, and seeing as how the mask essentially represents unlimited power, each person who gets a hold of the mask, aka this unlimited power, has a different reason for it. And I think each person does something different with the power, and you learn more about the characters through the way that they use the mask. Now, as I said, each book kind of honestly reads the same, but it does feel like as the series goes on, it gets kind of zanier and sillier, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. So for instance, in one of the books, you have the mask fighting a bunch of Dark Horse superheroes, and then again, just the entire concept of neo-Nazis and samurai and whoever else fighting over the mask makes it feel kind of silly. And on one hand, that's kind of fun, but on the other hand, it does kind of diminish the uniqueness of the mask. And what I mean by that is that it goes back to that syndrome thing where it's like, if everyone's super, then no one's super. Basically, if everyone in the book has some kind of silliness to them, then that makes it feel like no one has silliness to them. And so I think this is one of the greatest criticisms that I have of the book, basically, is that by being silly all the way throughout, it actually diminishes the uniqueness and the specialness of the mask. Because of the fact that you have characters like Walter who are super strong and seemingly invulnerable, that makes the mask feel less special. And the early Mask comics especially feel a lot like they're trying to be like a Punisher type thing. It feels a lot like they're essentially aiming to be crime dramas, at least in my opinion. But again, it's hard to take them seriously just because everything about them is so silly. And so I do think that the tone of the comics is kind of a mess just in that sense. In other words, I think that they need to be more serious. I think they need to be more grounded, and then you can have the mask be the silliness that you need. As I said, the mask essentially gives you Bugs Bunny powers, and so it's one of those things to where if you have a really grounded world, and then you just have this silly character, that makes it feel all the more special. And then I think my second major criticism I have of the mask is that it feels like there isn't an overarching storyline. Basically, it just feels like each series is, oh, this person has the mask. Oh, this person has the mask. Oh, this person has the mask. And it doesn't really feel like you're building up to anything. And so the issue is that because of the fact that people are switching between having the mask so quickly, it makes it feel like you can't get attached to any of the characters. Part of it, I think, honestly, is just that the writing is not superb. The writing's pretty decent, you know, it's not bad. And I think you can do a lot in a limited series. I think that you can develop characters that people really love in only an issue or two. But it does kind of feel like, because of the fact that the world is so silly that the characters inhabit, it's not really that easy to get attached to any of them. It feels like there's a much bigger emphasis on the zaniness of the mask and of the world as a whole, as opposed to the internal struggles of the characters. That sounds kind of silly, but what I mean by that is that one of the better mask comics is The Hunt for Green October, and basically it's about a guy who cares about his daughter. And basically the guy's wife died in an avoidable accident, and so this girl lost her mother because of the fact that the proper safety precautions were not taken to protect her mother. And so as a result, the guy with the mask in this comic wants to get back at the people who more or less are responsible for the death of his wife. And so again, that is one of the better mask comics, like I said, and I think part of it is because you do have that father-daughter relationship. You do have a main character who is, somewhat likable. You do have the main character who cares about his daughter and he has a reason for using the mask. And so the character motivation is there. But again, it feels like the books would rather focus on neo-Nazis or ninjas trying to get the mask. It feels like the books would rather pay attention to the zaniness and cartoonishness of the world they inhabit as opposed to any sort of human struggles. But really, I do think that the mask comics suffer a lot from not having a clear main character. Like I said, the closest thing to a main character is Lieutenant Kellaway, and I think he's in every mask comic except for one. But again, he doesn't really experience any kind of character growth. He doesn't really do anything. Usually what happens with him is that after the mask has first been acquired by someone, the person goes on a rampage, and then Lieutenant Kellaway, wherever he's at, he turns on the news and then he sees, oh, there is a green masked person who's doing something. And then he goes, oh, it must be the mask. And then he gets on a plane and goes to the city or whatever. And essentially his role in every comic is he's just kind of there to help round up the mask and there to help defeat the mask. But sometimes he does more stuff than others, and all in all, he doesn't really change that much as a character. And so really, as I'm explaining, the mask is a really unique idea. It's a really special idea because it essentially gives you cartoon powers, and different people can use it for different things, and so it acts like a Green Lantern ring or a symbiote. And so I think it's a really great tool to be used to explore different characters and their motivations and such, but the mask comics never fully realize that. The most recent Mask comic dropped in 2019, I Pledge Allegiance to the Mask, and basically what it is it's about a politician who grabs a hold of the mask and the mask becomes president. And literally that's it, the mask becomes president. And so the book is kind of cool because you have callbacks to the original trilogy. Kathy is a character in it and Lieutenant Kellaway is in there. And so I appreciate that book just because of the fact that it does strive to be more grounded than the other Mask stuff. Tonally, it's a lot more in line with what I would want to see from a modern Mask sequel, and I think the art is really great in it, but honestly, it never quite comes together so well. It's a short series, I think it's only 4 issues, and so it's just one of those things to where it feels kind of rushed, because you start off with a politician who has the mask and who wants to become president, and then the next issue or two he's president, and so it feels like there are a lot of time jumps in that one. And so I think I really appreciate that series because it strives to be a faithful sequel to the original, but at the same time it's just not quite able to pull it off. I do think that the mask could be a good vehicle for social satire and political satire, because again, the mask is just representative of power, right? And so it's just a question of if you give someone power, what do they do with it? But again, I don't feel like that book fully realized the mask's potential, and I don't feel like any of the others did either. And I think the mask is really cool because it kind of veers into a bunch of different genres. It's a superhero comic, but at the same time, it's a crime drama, and I think it could potentially verge on being a horror comic. And so I think there are a lot of different ways that you could go about making a mask comic. But again, it just, it never really happened, I think. I don't think there's a Mask comic that's really perfect, that fully utilizes the idea to its fullest. And that makes me sad because, again, I'm a fan of the comics. I read all of them, or at least I read the 2 omnibuses, and then I read the final series. There are a bunch of crossovers that DC did with the Mask for whatever reason. I know that the Mask had a kids show, and I believe there were comics based off of the kids show that I haven't read. Jim Carrey has talked about doing a Mask sequel, and I believe that the president of Dark Horse Comics has said that they've tried to revive the Mask multiple multiple times in terms of it being like a film and TV show and in terms of it being a comic. And so basically I'm just laying this all out there because I hope that there's more Mask stuff, but I just hope that it's more fully able to realize its potential. Again, I think there are a lot of cool ideas with this series, but ideas are ideas, I guess, and execution is more important. So anyways, I guess that's what I have to say about The Mask. Thank you for watching. If you've read The Mask, let me know what you think. Anytime I talk to people about it, they were always like, what, The Mask is a comic book? Like, not a single person I talked to knew that it was a comic book before it was a movie. They just thought that the Jim Carrey movie was like all there was. So that's what I got. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night, and goodbye.